Hello and welcome to the ST Squared podcast. That's right. If you've made it here, thank you very much for listening. It's Smalltown Sportstalk, and it's an NBA trade deadline edition. I'm Andrew Willett, and I'm joined by our resident Suns fan, Mr. Jonah Freeman. Jonah, how are we doing today?
Fantastic.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
When it comes to sports-wise, Suns fan, like you just mentioned, don't really know how or why. It's hard, but I'm a Suns fan. Like you mentioned, today's trade deadline special, but it's not all it'll be. It'll be NFL, any sports like that. So when it comes to NFL, I'm a Colts fan. College basketball, Purdue fan. Big win over IU the other day. MLB.
Glad you had to mention that.
St. Louis Cardinals. And then I don't watch a lot of hockey. I don't really get into it, but just I've been to St. Louis a lot being a Cardinals fan, so I do keep track of how the Blues play. Obviously, big win last year. No bandwagon here. What about you, sports-wise? Who you rock with?
NBA, huge Boston Celtics fan.
Ugh.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense being from Indiana, but big-time Boston Celtics fan. NFL, Colts, Indianapolis, hometown. The freaking Red Sox. Oh my goodness.
Just made a big splash, didn't they?
Yeah, a big splash. Good way of putting that, Jonah. Anyway, you said hockey. Pretty much the same. I ride with the Celtics and the Red Sox, so Boston Bruins fan.
Yep.
Nice of you to talk about that St. Louis Blues last year. Anyway, let's get right into it. We're going to pretty much do a rundown of each trade one by one. Jonah, first one.
It's a big one. I think this is the one that really made big splash. The Rockets picked up Robert Covington, Jordan Bell, who was eventually traded for Bruno Caboclo with a 2024 second-round pick. That sent Clint Capella and Nene to the Hawks. That allowed Malik Beasley, Juan Hernangomez, Evan Turner, Jared Vanderbilt to head to Minnesota. And the Nuggets picked up Gerald Green, Keita Bates-Diop, Shabazz Napier, and Noah Vonleh with a 2020 first-round pick from the Rockets. What were your initial thoughts on that?
Initially, like a 12-player trade. That's pretty crazy.
And that was honestly, I mean, other than the Clarkson trade, that was how a trade deadline really kind of kicked off. I feel like, in my opinion, that was kind of like the
middle of the night. It was like 1 a.m. I think.
That was like trade deadline's here. You know, that was that first Woj bomb. It felt like.
Well, and the Capella news had been heating up all week.
Oh yeah, all these different teams interested in him.
And eventually it was Atlanta who wound up with him. Capella was a piece that Atlanta wanted, and for some reason Houston talked about it all week to get rid of him. And initially I wasn't so sure Houston got everything they should have got out of that.
I think Covington is a good player. I do. He's averaging 11 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, and an assist. Like, just in these first 3 games from Houston. But, like, I think he's that 3-and-D type guy. But at the same time, as you've seen, they're going to small ball. And I don't know if the league is necessarily ready for small ball. I think there's a lot of teams out there that they still have their one dominant center, and the Rockets don't have that now.
Yeah, and for some reason it was Daryl Morey just decided to get rid of their one center.
Who has played extremely well at times.
He really has. He came in undrafted and has really developed really well alongside James Harden. And it's going to be interesting to not see any more of those Harden drives to the Capella lob for the slam.
Yes, for sure.
And like you said, they're really doing small ball with Robert Covington, and then obviously trading Jordan Bell for Bruno Caboclo. And I don't know how that's going to go, because it really is a generational change.
It is. That could be, you'll look back at this 10, 15 years and say, like, this is what started that move, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You'll look back and there's a good chance 20, 25 teams don't have a big center on their team. And you'll have to look back and say the Rockets started that by moving Capella.
You're right. It could start this movement, or it could make or break the Houston Rockets.
Yeah. Because this is a year they definitely have the pieces to contend with the Warriors' injuries. And obviously Kawhi's not in Toronto, so Toronto's very good this year. but I don't know if they're that same force they were last year. So I think this is definitely a year the Rockets could make a championship run, and I don't know if they're going to be able to get that done without Capella. But we'll see.
They made this trade as the fifth seed. Atlanta, of course, got their center, Clint Capella. How does he fit in with Atlanta?
I like it. I think he's not that he's super athletic, but he gives you that big body that is athletic.
He's a rim runner.
Yeah, and exactly. And you have the young talent, obviously, in Atlanta with Trae Young, Reddish.
It'll be interesting to see how he fits in
Collins.
with Trae Young.
Yeah, I think, and I really like Collins and Capella together because of the youth on that team. I feel like that is a good core.
It allows Collins for sure to slide into a better position for him.
Yeah, it's more of probably a 4 rather than just trying to adapt. Because Alex Lynn, obviously, we'll talk about later, got moved as well. I don't know if Lynn was that big at times, which I think put pressure on the Hawks to let John Collins cover that. And I don't know if that was really the spot Collins should have or needed to be at. So the fact Collins can now step back and start maybe even developing a three-point shot, mid-range shot, could be huge because you don't have to worry about Collins needing to be in the post and in the paint at all times.
Well, it's the opposite of what we just saw Houston do, which is make that trade to get rid of Capella and go small ball.
Right.
Atlanta sided with getting that traditional big, trying to help out defensively because he's going to be a very important defensive player for them. And then they also got Nene in the trade. They waived him, so he's off the team. Then Minnesota. I was pretty pleased with who they got in this whole deal, and they only gave up Jordan Bell and Keita Bates-Diop and Shabazz Napier.
Yeah.
I suppose Noah Vonleh as well. But I think they got a really good return for how much they gave out, getting Malik Beasley, who long overdue, getting some more minutes. He played a huge role in their first game, having 23 points, and he's got a big payday ahead of him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Juan Hernan-Gomez, I liked that pickup.
I think it just seemed like in Minnesota things were not well in the locker room, and obviously it was showing in the record. But
coming into this trade, having lost their last 13 games.
Yeah, so I think not only did they acquire some decent pieces, but they acquired assets and provided some good depth around, obviously a trade we'll talk about later, bringing in D'Lo, pairing D'Lo with Cat. I think they definitely brought in the players they needed to bring in. They did what they needed to, really, honestly.
Know anything about Jared Vanderbilt?
No, I don't.
He's an interesting young player. I think he's a rookie. And then they also got guard Evan Turner, who has been waived, and that'll be interesting to look at the buyout market later on in this episode. Because Evan Turner did some looks from a couple of Eastern Conference teams. And then we moved to the last team of this crazy 4-team trade, the Denver Nuggets. Gerald Green, they waived him. I think the Keita Bates-Diop is
It's a good pickup in my opinion.
Yes.
Whenever they were playing the Suns the other night, he came in off the bench, and he not only, I think his offense isn't quite there yet, but it can't get there. He really good at Ohio State, and his defensive presence was big late in that game for Denver. He played some defense on Oubre, switched on to Booker some. He was very good, and I think that was the type of player the Nuggets needed to boost some of that depth on the defensive end. Because obviously on the bench you have your offense and Porter Jr. So bringing in a guy like Keita Bates-Diop they can just flat out defend, I think is huge.
And I think the Nuggets, who also got Shabazz Napier, who they traded for Jordan McRae, and Noah Vonleh, they kind of switched out their bottom few guys with Malik Beasley and Juan Hernan-Gomez, Jared Vanderbilt. They kind of traded those guys for, I don't want to say, although I'd say worse players who can fill out their roster, because those guys that they got rid of, they needed more minutes to truly.
And some of that, just changing scenery, helps a lot of people. Obviously, Victor Oladipo, not that he was a bad player, but until he got to Indiana and he got that fit he needed, he was just a role player. and obviously now he's an all-star, looking to take another big step. But just giving some of these other guys that haven't necessarily played the best on their teams a new opportunity to come in and fight for minutes with a new group of guys, a new coach, obviously that can help them with confidence, knowing that fresh start. So who won this trade?
I don't know.
I'd say probably the Hawks. I think for the Rockets, first to say the Rockets won, I think we need time to see how this experiment works out. Because this could, like we said, it could work out and it could not. But if it works out, going small ball could help a lot. But I think immediate impact-wise, I think the Hawks win the trade, bringing in Capella.
Me personally, I think the Minnesota Timberwolves bringing in Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan Gomez, Evan Turner, who they waived, and Jared Vanderbilt, and they got a first rounder out of this.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think the Timberwolves won this trade. Moving on.
All right, so the next one we have the Miami Heat really bringing in Iguodala was that big headliner. I feel like that a lot of people are talking about from the Grizzlies. They weren't able to get him bought out, and he didn't want to play there. So ultimately, the Heat brought in Iguodala as long as Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill, which allowed the Grizzlies to get Justice Winslow, James Johnson, Dion Waiters, who they did waive, and Gorgie Dang. And then the Timberwolves came in as well and grabbed James Johnson. What thoughts on that?
Initial reaction to that trade, I thought Memphis came out really strong because that was the initial report, that it was just Justice Winslow involved in a trade for Andre Iguodala.
Yeah.
Hearing that Miami also got Jay Crowder along with Andre Iguodala and also Solomon Hill, I think Miami had a really strong turnout in that trade.
I think they added a lot. They got 3 good players. There's not a player in that trade that they picked up that is not going to play at all. I think they added another dimension to their team that they didn't really need. They've played extremely well all year, and they only got better at the deadline. You know, I really like that move for them. I think with Iguodala, as of right now, coming in, he's going to struggle. Obviously, he hasn't played since the finals last year. It's going to take time, just like an injury. You hear people say you can't simulate NBA game speed. You know, it's going to take time. But then bringing in Crowder, who is going to give you immediate depth, and Solomon Hill, a veteran guy, he's going to space the floor. He's going to hit open shots, and he's going to defend. So I do like that move a lot for the Heat.
Not only did they get 3 good players out of that, but they dumped the contracts that they needed to dump.
Exactly, yeah.
Got rid of Dion Waiters and James Johnson, guys who were making way too much money. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're on expiring deals, but a really good turnout for Miami. And then Memphis, I still think had a good trade.
Oh, I like Justice Winslow a lot, and I think
he's coming off a back injury.
He's 23 years old?
Oh, yeah.
So being added to another good young core in Memphis with Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Dylan Brooks,
Brandon Clark.
Yeah, for sure. I like the Winslow addition for the Grizzlies. And I really, honestly, I don't know if they had the money. I would have liked to see what Waiters could do with the Grizzlies because I really think Dion Waiters is a good player, but you hear a lot of some off-the-court issues in Miami that kind of held him back for sure. So I think Waiters is going to be a really good player if he can get himself together with whoever brings him and picks him up.
He's another one of those buyout market options.
Yeah, they could really end up being a big piece for a title contending team late in the year.
And then I also think Memphis made the most of they acquired James Johnson, and immediately I was a little confused from the Timberwolves standpoint, but they traded him for James Johnson.
Right.
Or for Gorgie Dane, excuse me.
Yeah.
And so I think the thinking for that from Minnesota's standpoint was they got rid of Gorgie Dane's contract, which had this year on it and next year, for a guy whose deal was up at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So
it gives them flexibility
moving forward.
Yeah. So they got good players out of it, but at the same time, they do have that flexibility that they could end up needing at the end of this year.
And you had an interesting take on Miami's acquisitions.
Yeah, me personally, now I'm not saying Iguodala is a bad player. I think Iguodala if the Heat really do make a push at the end of the year, I think Iguodala could be one of those guys that is a game changer. But for me personally, I feel like the biggest acquisition, I guess, for the Heat would be Jay Crowder. Like, I really like Jay Crowder. I think he's like that good 3-and-D guy. Last night for Miami, Crowder had 18, 11, and 3. And I liked what he was able to do. I like what he had done with Memphis. I just feel like he's one of those guys that could, if Jimmy Butler needs to stay in with some of the bench players or something like that, I think he's a guy that complements Jimmy Butler nicely. And I think he has that kind of Miami swagger. You know
he was one of Jimmy Butler's teammates at Marquette.
Right. Like, I feel like he is that mold that fits what Miami's trying to put together right now.
And here's where I'm gonna disagree with you. And of course, like, being a Boston guy, biggest Jay Crowder fan. And the funny thing about this is that he is still on this trade. He has been traded on that Boston contract for I think this is a third or fourth time, amazingly. And finally, he's wound up with Miami Heat with his deal expiring at the end of the year. But I'm gonna have to say Andre Iguodala is a better player in Miami, simply because I think he can do more.
Yeah.
On both ends of the floor. He's the guy you talked about being able to shut down some of the big wins. They talked about that in LA. He was going to be able to guard one of LeBron James or Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And I think he'll be able to do the same out east. Just getting a body on Giannis, because no one's stopping Giannis.
No.
But
you can only contain Giannis.
Yes, sir.
You can't full on stop him.
But getting a body on him, getting a body on Jason Tatum, being able to stop Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward. There are some wins out east too, and I think he's going to play a pivotal role both down there and on the offensive end. He can just do some things that you don't really often see out of forwards. He has some good vision with the basketball, and obviously we've seen his track record in the playoffs.
Right. I do. I like both additions, and I 100% see what you're saying. I think just the separation for me is the fact Crowder can come in like we saw last night, and he's going to make immediate impact.
Oh, yeah. He hit 5 3-pointers in his first Miami appearance.
So in a stretch that is big for Miami, for them to try to get up, grab that 2, maybe even push for the 1. I don't think that's really necessarily in reach, but they definitely have a legitimate shot at the 2 spot. So I think bringing in a guy like that right now, when Butler's been having some minor health issues, that's big right now. But I completely agree. In the long run, I think Iguodala could be a better player, but I like the Crowder move more as of right now because of what he can bring right now.
You can look at just some of those Miami lineups down the stretch that are going to be deadly.
Oh, yeah.
With Jimmy Butler on the court, Bam Adebayo on the court, Andre Iguodala on the court, Jay Crowder on the court, and then you throw in one of their mini shooters, and they're going to lock some people up.
Oh, yeah.
Bam Adebayo is one of the better defenders, and so it was just a really good trade for Miami. And I think Memphis, for trading a player that they weren't playing at all, they got some pretty good return, and Minnesota created some flexibility.
I agree.
Personally, I think Miami won that deal.
I think Miami wins the deal too, but I don't think. I mean, Minnesota, it's not a bad get, and Memphis, none of those are bad gets. I think all 3 teams in that trade could be considered winners. I just think Miami gets more immediate impact out of this trade.
I agree. Moving on.
So the next big trade, I think, is probably the biggest Woj bomb I saw this trade deadline.
And someone was calling it too, if I remember.
I don't know who that was. Obviously, Timberwolves bringing in D'Angelo Russell with Jacob Evans, Omari Spellman, ultimately sending Wiggins and 2021 top 3 protected first and a 2021 second to the Golden State Warriors. What are your thoughts on that?
So this was a loaded trade. I honestly couldn't believe it happened when it did. I thought Golden State was going to hold on to D'Angelo Russell through the summer.
I really think Golden State just kind of got desperate. I think they realized, he may not be that piece we need in the long run, and if we hold on to him and teams see that could take down some of his value that he had.
True.
It's a high he had a high value there. So I think they got desperate, but I did think they got it pretty good.
I would agree with that. Looking back on it, I wasn't very high on the trade, but did a top 3 2021 protected first-round pick from Minnesota and a second-round pick to go along with. And I really don't hate the fit for Andrew Wiggins and Golden State. I've heard a lot of hate heading his way.
I like the Wiggins move. I don't like the Wiggins contract when it comes for the Warriors. But I don't think either team really loses that trade. I think Russell in Minnesota could get that stability he hasn't had in his career. And I think Andrew Wiggins could flourish because he hasn't played for a consistent coach that's been there and like built a team around him. He hasn't played for this top team that needs another big player like the Warriors would need next year. Obviously with KD not being there, Wiggins could be perfect next to Clay and Steph. And I do like the Wiggins pickup. My big thing was the contract. And I think my big question about this whole trade is, what were the Suns doing? Like, not that Wiggins is bad, top 3 protected first-round pick, but you just paired D'Lo with Cat, and obviously they're best friends with Devin Booker. So the Suns definitely could have given more without giving up a lot to bring in D'Lo. So it's just like it's kind of shocked me, last year, free agency, and then ultimately in the trade deadline. They've had 2 opportunities to go get D'Lo, and it really just seems like they haven't.
I have some words about their offseason last year.
It was interesting, I guess. But I think it'd be interesting to hear from James Jones' standpoint how they view D'Lo, because they've had their chances to go get him, and it really hasn't. It seems like they have not been interested, and I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because I don't want to think that Devin Booker would demand a trade to the Minnesota Timberwolves, but I do think they better have been communicating with Booker the right way, I guess is what the point I'm trying to get across. Like, we don't know how that's gone, but if they didn't communicate well with Booker and Booker gets unhappy and losing continues, he will demand a trade. So I hope the Suns handle that well, because they had their opportunity to bring in one of Devin Booker's good friends and ultimately a really good player, and they didn't do it twice.
And that was just a little preview on your Phoenix Suns segment coming up soon. But I think Minnesota did a great thing in stealing away your because that's a trio, that D'Angelo Russell, Devin Booker, Karl Anthony Towns.
And that could be a deadly trio, 100%.
And Minnesota just paired 2 out of the 3, and signs pointed to
they said in a Slam interview over the summer that they want to play with each other before their careers are over. And now you do, like you just said, you have 2 of the 3 together now. And Booker's not necessarily in a winning environment right now. So, like I said, I don't think that happens, but the door is definitely open for it with this deal.
And I think Minnesota did a good thing I think this is going to keep Karl Anthony Towns happy. Cat wanted D'Angelo Russell. And I like the pieces they also added. I was a little confused that the Warriors gave up Jacob Evans, their first-round pick, and Amari Spellman, who really has been playing pretty well for them this year.
I think the chemistry change, I think, is the biggest thing the Timberwolves gain from this. Not because obviously Russell's a good player, but we've heard a lot of outside noise and noise directly from Cat that he was frustrated for a good amount of time. And I saw just on Twitter earlier, D'Lo and Cat both paid for 1,000 tickets to bring in fans to their first game together. So I think they're both excited to play with each other. And I think the chemistry there could be something special. And that duo together could be extremely good if they can find the right pieces to put around them in the future.
And here is where I like the Andrew Wiggins move. Steve Kerr said it's a better positional fit than D'Angelo Russell was.
Oh, yeah.
And he's going to be 3rd or 4th option behind Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, proven stars in this league. And I think if you can add him and that 2021 top 3 protected first-round pick, I'm interested to see what Golden State can do with their pick this year and that top 3 pick in 2021, or top 5 pick, because I don't think they want to throw in a couple of young guys. I think they want some veterans to get them right back to the NBA Finals.
Right, I agree. So in your eyes with this trade, who is your winner? And I think that's a tough one because I think both teams benefit a lot from who they exchanged.
Personally, I thought Golden State won this trade because I like the fit for Andrew Wiggins, and I love the top 3 protected first-round pick.
I agree. I think the Timberwolves, you can make a case for them because of the potential future. They just obviously they're setting themselves up for it. But I really am excited to see how Wiggins is in a new environment, paired next to a healthy Steph and a healthy Clay next year.
Obviously, Minnesota just hit the reset button, and right. I don't think that's bad either.
No.
Moving on.
All right, so the next one, Clippers bringing in Marcus Morris and Isaiah Thomas, who was waived. And then Maurice Harkless, a 2020 first and a second-round pick from Detroit, goes to New York Knicks. And the Washington Wizards get Jerome Robinson. How do you think Marcus Morris' impact is in LA?
Okay, so I've got mixed emotions on Marcus Morris. Obviously, he's had a great year with the Knicks, averaging 20 points per game. But I watched him in Boston all last year. He was not great for the chemistry.
Right.
He's a ball stopper. He's a good ISO player and a good defender. And I don't think he's a terrible locker room guy, but he's a ball stopper.
For sure. I think same way with a lot of these players getting traded. I think a lot of these teams, this trade deadline, made some big time acquisitions, but there are also question marks. And then just like in this Morris case, it's going to depend on if some of these guys can buy into the system they're being brought into.
Absolutely.
Because if Morris can eliminate some of that ball stopping that you just mentioned, that's a big time pickup if he can fit the right way in LA. Pairing him with PG, Kawhi, Patrick Beverly, Harrell, I mean, like that is a good starting lineup for a team that has a lot of depth too.
And it was another move that really we saw put LA into title contention even more.
Yeah, I mean, we knew with bringing in PG, bringing in Kawhi, they were going to be up there, but
their front office
they're not
does
settling
it again.
with that. Yeah, they want to keep improving it, and I think they did that. I like the Morris pickup. They need to hope it works out the way they want it to.
And then they gave up Maurice Harkless, who I think we can safely say Mo Harkless lost the trade deadline day.
For sure.
That dude went from a championship or a possible championship to the New York Knicks. And
you're saying the Knicks can't win the NBA
Mo
Finals?
Harkless, yes, Jonah, that is exactly what I'm saying. Mo Harkless, I am so sorry. But the Knicks also got the Clippers' last available first-round pick that they could offer, and a second-round pick via Detroit, and Jerome Robinson to the Wizards to drop Isaiah Thomas. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I haven't watched a lot of Jerome Robinson, but I understand why Isaiah Thomas was waived, and I don't know exactly why they brought him in, if they were going to waive him, because honestly, I feel like if in the right environment, Isaiah Thomas could be an impactful player.
He'll be another interesting buyout option.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. It's another one of those guys that is a good enough player that if the right fit of a contender can bring him in, that could be big late in the year.
All right, who do you feel won the trade, Jonah?
I think the Clippers for sure.
I'd have to agree with that. It'll be interesting to see how Morris fits in, but yeah, for right now, Clippers have won this deal.
I agree. The next trade, which in my opinion, this may be the biggest pickup, one of the biggest pickups in this trade deadline, is the fact that the Jazz were able to bring in Jordan Clarkson for Dante Exum, a 2022 second-round pick, and a 2023 second-round pick. Clarkson's been good for the Jazz in the games he's played with them, for sure.
Absolutely.
With the Jazz, he's averaging 15 and 2. And the rebounds necessarily aren't there, the assists aren't there. But there have been times when
that's not what they needed, though.
Right,
when
they
made
needed
this trade.
scoring. And they needed some of that physical stuff. Like, at times, I think Conley, not that he's necessarily old, but he's like he's in that range where he's not productive all the time. And Mitchell's still a young enough player. He's not going to consistently give you 25 or 30 a night. And we've seen twice this year, whenever their offense has been struggling, Clarkson's come in and given you 30 or more, and on 2 separate occasions this year with the Jazz. So I think that was another one of those. The culture change benefited him, and it benefited the Jazz. I think the Jazz brought in a really good player.
Yeah, we've seen them go on a huge run. They're near the top of the West now. I believe they're the 4th seed.
Yep.
But they were all the way up at the 2nd seed at one point, so they've been playing much better basketball since trading for Jordan Clarkson.
The Jazz aren't out of it. They're 5.5 games out of first place.
It's true.
So a move like that could benefit a lot.
And I don't think Cleveland made a bad move either.
No.
I think Edsum's not bad. He obviously had his career high, but he's only playing 13 minutes a game for the Cavs. Cavs are really just exploring a lot. They're getting a lot of players. The 2 seconds I don't hate. You did a lot for 2 seconds. So
I like the Jazz in that trade.
obviously, I think we can both agree the Jazz won that trade.
Right. And then speaking of the moves the Cavaliers made, the Cavaliers also were able to bring in Andre Drummond from Detroit in return for John Henson, Brandon Knight in a 2023 second.
Oh my gosh.
That is an interesting trade.
Jonah,
I
I couldn't believe this move when it happened.
I think when it first happened, my initial reaction was, what is next? Like, I thought that was one of those domino things. Like, from the Phoenix Suns standpoint, I think whenever I first saw that, I really thought that maybe Kevin Love was coming to Phoenix, or maybe Tristan Thompson was going to be traded to Boston. I don't know why they have 3 guys like Kevin Love, Drummond, and Thompson all on the roster. But like you mentioned, Drummond's going to be a free agent, if not this summer, next summer. So, like you mentioned, the fact that they kind of get this trial period with him, see how he meshes with Sexton and Garland, that is big. And they didn't have to give up a lot to get that trial period at all.
Oh my gosh. I think you said it. They gave up a bag of chips.
And that's nothing against Henson or Knight, but Brandon Knight hasn't really done anything.
No, yeah, those
in the
guys
last
have
5 years.
hardly played.
So I mean, essentially, the way I look at this is Henson and Knight are both replaceable on any team. If you're a team and you drop those 2 guys, you can replace them pretty easily. So essentially, the Cavaliers brought in Drummond for a 2023 second, when you really look at it. So obviously, in my case, I think the Cavaliers won that trade.
Yeah.
They're a very bad team, but it does not hurt trying out something like that.
I agree.
And then just a couple, not necessarily huge moves, but the Trailblazers bringing in Ariza, Wingan Gabriel, Swanigan in return for, and sending Kent Bazemore and Tolliver in 2 second rounds to the Kings.
I don't know. I thought that was a pretty good move.
I like it. With Collins out, Swanigan's Purdue guy, you know. Swanigan has given
yeah,
some
that's
good,
your guy.
Yeah, Swanigan has given some good minutes that they've needed, and he's doing the things that he did at Purdue. He's getting rebounds.
A little side interesting note on Swanigan. It's his 3rd year in the league. He's played with either Sacramento or Portland for every single year.
That's right. So I think it's, again, none of these players are necessarily bad players. It's mostly culture swap. You know what I mean? See how these guys can fit. And Portland knew what they were getting in Swanigan, but they were looking for someone like Swanigan with Zach Collins missing time and Nurkic obviously still being out.
I think the big get for them was Trevor Ariza, who really he played 32 games for the Kings, made 0 starts, and has come into Portland. Obviously, has been needed so much more with all the injuries they have and the limit they have. He started every game he's played for Portland. He's been in the league since like 2004, but he's averaging 10 points a game now with Portland. Like you said, Swanigan, they knew what they were getting. They needed that. And Swanigan and Gabriel each. Gabriel's only played 8 minutes per game, but this is how bad Portland needed to make this trade. Right. He's made a start.
Yeah.
And same with Swanigan. He's made a start.
And it's unfortunate the injuries they've had because Damian Lillard is playing
balling
out of his mind right now. And any other time with them healthy, they're going on a 7-8 game win streak, and they haven't been able to do that because of the depth they're lacking. And it really is unfortunate.
This is a team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year.
Right.
So they're trying to get all the help they can get. This trade really was pushing them over the top as they're trying to fight for that playoff spot.
Mm-hmm.
They're just a couple of games back from Memphis for that 8th spot, which I think everyone's going for out west right now. But and then Sacramento, Kent Bazemore has been pretty important for them. He's on an expiring contract, and then Anthony Tolliver has taken on a much smaller role as well. Moving on.
Who do you think won that trade?
Oh, the winner of that trade, I think it's Portland.
I think it's Portland mostly because they out of depth that they desperately were needing.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so the next one is the Hawks bringing back Jeff Teague, longtime good player there, and then bringing in Treveon Graham in return for Alan Crabb.
I don't know if you saw this, but I liked this. Jeff Teague, he was number 0, I believe, with the Hawks his first time around. And then this time around, he is 00.
I didn't know.
So this second stint in Atlanta, that's pretty cool.
Right. I feel like Jeff Teague was one of those guys, along with Dedmon, who we'll talk about later. Teague's been good everywhere he's been, but he's not been good like he was in Atlanta when they made that big run.
They had that 60-win team back in like 2016, 2017.
You know, Teague's played for the Pacers. He was pretty good for it. Just that was an interesting team. Having Monte Ellis there too, it just didn't seem like they had a lot of guys that fit together. And then Minnesota, not that he was bad, it's just, again, it wasn't the right fit for him.
No.
Which is why I think the Hawks are willing to bring him back, see what they can get out of him behind Trae Young.
And I think Atlanta's just right now in a phase where they're trying to get good players on their team.
Right.
And he's going to be a good backup for Trae Young.
Yeah.
Just matter of fact.
And it's big, not that Trae Young necessarily needs mentoring. Like, Trae Young has proven he's going to be extremely good. But for Trae Young to learn and to pick up some things from a veteran like Teague, who has been there and he's been a good player, could be huge in Young's development.
And it was pretty much expiring contract for expiring contract, but I think Atlanta won that deal.
I agree. Yep. And then the last big one, Andrew may have a couple other ones to touch on, but was the Hawks bringing back Dwayne Dedmon and a 2020 and 2021 second-round pick in return for Jabari Parker and Alex Len. I like the swap. Len was not cutting it in Atlanta. And I think, I was talking to you earlier about this, Dedmon seems like one of those guys where he's got his fit, almost like a Lance Stevenson in Indiana type thing. Like, he's got his team he flourishes with. And Dedmon was good with the Hawks, got paid, and it wasn't working out, or he was. So I think it makes sense for the Hawks to go back to that, see what they can get behind Capella, see if they can get some of that same production he was getting before they moved, like he left.
He was absolutely good with Atlanta. He averaged nearly 11 points per game and 8 rebounds per game last year, which earned him that $13 million a year for the next for 3 years. And so that's why he got that money in Sacramento. And he caused a little bit of a ruckus, and that's why he's back on Atlanta. But you're right, that's a good fit for him.
Right. And then Parker, we know he can play. He's struggled injury-wise, but he's a player. Alex Len, I just think it'll be interesting to see how he can fit in Sacramento because Bagley may be done for the year. So with Bagley being out, that leaves Rashawn Holmes and Alex Len to really cover a lot of the minutes at center. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Len can do with some of those younger guys because he's going to have the opportunity to play with them.
And one more thing on Jabari Parker, I just wanted to touch on that. I think he's one of those players, a lot like Andrew Wiggins. They were the top 2 picks in their draft class, where they just haven't found their spot yet.
They haven't been in the right environment, the right team, right coach.
I don't know that they have. They haven't been able to find a feel for the game without being in their spots. And I think Wiggins might have just gotten there. He's done pretty well so far as a Warrior. And then it'll be interesting to see about Jabari Parker. He's going to be coming off the bench again. And so we'll see. We know he can score, but it's those other things that we're just not so sure about.
And then I think the Hawks win that trade just because I think the Hawks win that trade because of another trade. I think the Capella and Dedmon bring-ins, I like those two coming in on a team that didn't really have a very good center. So bringing in Capella and bringing back in Dedmon, two big hits, and I like the Hawks in that trade. but I don't think the Kings necessarily lost.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think Sacramento won that deal. I like Parker, and Dedmon was not going to do well in Sacramento. So.
And then do you have any other trades you want to touch up on? Or?
No, sir. Ready to move on.
All right, so in your opinion, who won the trade deadline?
The winner of the trade deadline. Oh, that's a tough one. I think it might have to be the LA Clippers just because of how good they are. They're the best team that made a trade, and if it works out, it might propel them to the championship.
You have a great point, so I'm not disagreeing. But in my opinion, I like the Heat. I like the Heat's moves. I mean, like you said, they got rid of their big contracts that they really didn't want or need. And they brought in someone like Iguodala, who could be huge. And then they brought in Crowder and Hill, who are going to be immediate impact guys for a team that's already extremely good the way it is. So I like the Heat there, but I completely understand what you're saying.
And just in my opinion with the Heat, we can go ahead and touch on the Heat because we're going to touch on a few of our championship contenders and a few more of we have just a few teams we'd like to touch on. My opinion, Miami, I don't know that this trade puts them over the top. I don't think they're necessarily that close. Well, I think the Clippers got some depth that they needed.
Right. Yeah, I completely see your point there. So then speaking on the Clippers, just a brief overview. What are your predictions? What is their limit this year? What do you think about them so overall?
Okay, so they came into this year being the title favorites. Like, we all picked them to go on and win our championship. And I think after the deadline, they stayed right there. Everybody, there was a brief period of time when everybody liked the Lakers. Obviously after Kobe's death, LeBron was going to do it for Kobe and the Lakers, but I think the Clippers have positioned themselves to remain the championship favorites.
I agree. I think I like the Clippers as a regular season team just because I think obviously the Raptors were good last year, but I think it kind of held the Raptors back at times when Kawhi was load managing. But this year, when Kawhi's load managing, they still have PG.
Absolutely.
Like they can have a star on the floor at all times, which I think in the long run could help them out and help them make a push for that 1 seed. They're 3 games out right now behind LA. The Lakers, I guess, talking to LA teams. But Kawhi's been a different beast in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
So
without a doubt,
you have that beast in Kawhi. You have another beast in PG, and then you have potentially just brought in another beast in Morris in the playoffs. So I think they're up there. In my opinion, honestly, I like them. I do. I think they're still my favorite to win it all right now.
I agree.
So then we'll just
transition.
Center. We'll stay right there. Lakers, thoughts?
The LA Lakers. I don't think they made the moves that were necessary to put them atop the pack out west. Obviously, you have the Bucks out east, and that'll be interesting to see what they do in the playoffs. But out west, I don't know that they did what they needed to. And obviously, I don't think they had what they needed to make that move because I don't think they wanted to trade Kuzma. And I think that was a smart decision at the end of the day to hold on to Kuzma. He's your future. After him, after LeBron, that's about the only asset that you have right now.
Right. I think the way I look at the two LA teams is to start the year, both of them had the star power. Both of them had some of the depth that they needed. I think the Clippers have more depth, but they were neck and neck, in my opinion. So at the deadline, the Lakers stayed put, and the Clippers didn't. The Clippers went out and made their team better, and the Lakers stayed put. So I think the Clippers definitely have that edge. I think they had that edge, but I think they have more of an edge now, I guess I should say, in regards to those two teams. So obviously the Lakers are the Lakers right now with LeBron and AD. They're going to be good. They're going to be a threat in the playoffs. But I don't know if the Lakers made the move they needed to make to really submit their names as a title lock.
And it'll really be interesting to see what they do in the buyout market to see if they remain the same team that they are or if they go and make a move. And obviously to make a move, they're going to have to cut someone. So just interesting to see how they handle the buyout market, and I still like the Clippers over the Lakers right now.
Right. And then speaking of those two teams, just some small touch on both of them were interested in Darren Collison potentially coming out of retirement, and he just announced today that he is going to stay in retirement. And he didn't play at all last year, but he could have been a big piece for the depth of both of those teams.
Absolutely.
So his choice to stay out of the league, good for him, but at the same time, bad for the LA teams.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll stay in the West here. Trailblazers.
Portland is a team I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
They're obviously, before this trade deadline happened, they had the biggest salary cap of any team in the league. They've got a huge contract for Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. I think those are two guys that you need to keep. And to keep Damian Lillard, you got to keep CJ McCollum.
Right.
So just building
Damian
around.
Lillard been incredible. 30 points a game, 4 rebounds, 8 assists. He has been extremely good.
And he's had huge performances. Didn't win over the Lakers the other night. Didn't win over the Miami Heat the other night. Obviously, some troubles in the Utah game.
That was not happy. Damian was not happy at all, and rightfully so.
But I think at the trade deadline, they got a piece in Ariza that they should have got. They traded Stalabissiere to free up some cash. Obviously, they need some cash. They are low on how much they can spend to shore up that roster as they go without Zach Collins.
Right. I think obviously John Morant's playing phenomenal right now for the Grizzlies, but I think if the Trailblazers can get some of that depth back through getting guys healthy, I think the Blazers are the team that comes back up and grabs that A spot at the end of the day. Like, I think I like what the Grizzlies have right now, but I don't know if it's enough to sustain keeping that lead over a Portland team that's already doing all right with the injuries, and then you add a couple of more guys to what Dame is doing. I think Portland's a team that sneaks in the playoffs at the end.
I agree.
And then speaking of the West, we'll stay in the West for a little bit, actually, the Nuggets.
The Denver Nuggets. This is a team that I really think could be right there at the end of the day, a championship team.
Yeah.
They've got talent top to bottom.
That's the thing. They're not flashy. They don't have these stars that you're just going to always hear about. They just Jokic and a bunch of solid players.
Mm-hmm. And I think some potential rising stars as well.
Oh, yeah. Porter. And
Jamal Murray is in there.
And I think the big thing about this, too, is they were good last year with Harris being an absolute stud. And Gary Harris, he's not been bad, but he has not played.
He's dropped off for sure.
He's dropped off a little bit. So if you can find a way to get some of that back, they still have potential to get better. And they're already good. They're sitting at second in the Western Conference right now with a chance, like they're 3 back too. So they still have a chance to go grab that number 1 seed. So I like what the Nuggets have and their potential.
And I think trade deadline day, they did a good thing for their roster, for their culture, for their chemistry. They got rid of some pieces. Because I think Denver, similar to last year's Boston Celtics, was just a team with too much talent and not enough minutes, not enough opportunity. And so I thought Denver did a good thing getting Malik Beasley out of there on his contract year, because he's a really good player, but just stuck behind the likes of Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Monty Morris, another good player. And so I think getting him out of there, getting Hernan Gomez out of there, they kind of free themselves a little bit chemistry-wise, and they still added some good players to their bench.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, they're another contender. You cannot count them out, for sure.
And it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if they have the guys to be able to guard the wins of the LA teams.
All right.
And see if that homegrown talent can succeed in the playoffs.
Right. Rockets.
Houston.
How will small ball work? In your opinion, how do you envision small ball working out?
Obviously, their first game, they beat the Lakers.
And then they followed it up and lost by 30 plus to the Suns.
the point. I didn't get a chance to see that game. Obviously, someone over here was taking a peek at that one.
Oh yeah. I just think it's interesting because they're 1-2, and you made a good point earlier.
They were pretty
got a
much
good
positioned
chance
to be
at
2-1.
Bojan Bogdanovic had a big shot that you normally would not see go in. But at the end of the day, they're 1-2. I think it's interesting, though, when they won, the big they were playing against, Anthony Davis, dropped 32, 13, and 3. So in the game that center was dominant, they found a way to win. And then they come and they play the Suns, and the Suns blew them out of the water. Ayton only had.
Do you think that that trade or having small ball really tricked the Lakers into forcing it down there a lot more?
And that's the thing. I think the big thing off the bat with the small ball is it's going to be a chess match every single game between coaches to see how this works out. Because what I'm touching on now, like Ayton 12, 6, and 4, Gobert 12, 15, like those aren't bad stat lines, but they're not stat lines you'd expect with them being the only bigs on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it, the games they've lost, they haven't had a lot of center impact on the other team. It makes you wonder like what it's going to take, because I just don't know. I think it's interesting so far how it's played out.
And this is Mike D'Antoni's chess match here,
right?
Because this is what he wanted. This was his last hurrah. Obviously, Houston is going for it all right now this year. But it'll be interesting to see how D'Antoni does this.
Yeah, for sure. Next team then, Timberwolves. I mean, we've really touched a lot on the Timberwolves, but where do you see them as a franchise heading?
Obviously, they're not going to make the playoffs this year.
No.
I think it was a great move to get D'Angelo Russell with Tap. And I hate to break it to you, Jonah, but Phoenix really should watch out, because if they didn't get Devin Booker there, they're going to have Tap for a long time.
Right. I think I'll save that to my Phoenix Suns take. I'll save that until later. If that's all you have to say, then we'll move on to the Heat.
I like the Malik Beasley addition for Minnesota, and then after that, absolutely, Miami.
So, for me, I like Miami, but I will say, I think Jimmy Butler, he backs up his talk, but I feel like you get towards the end of the year, some of this talking he's done, it could hurt him, because you got someone like T.J. Warren. Obviously, they had some beef, and T.J. Warren didn't play all that great, but after that, he 25, 27, like he had a lot of good games where he was scoring and being extremely productive. So you have a lot of
You're excited for that T.J. Warren, Jimmy Butler matchup coming up.
So you have a lot of these teams, and Jimmy's confident, Jimmy's saying all this stuff, but Jimmy's got to keep in mind he's not the best player in the East, and he's going to run into some giants that he can't get by with talking down to someone like T.J. Warren. Like, he's going to run into someone and he's going to regret it. I really feel like that. Like, some of that in the end could hurt them.
Sure.
And I think that's a very minor thing. I do think that's something to look out for. But I like the Heat's roster. I like what they're doing. And we'll talk about this later, but I think the Heat, in my opinion, Spoelstra's got a good case for Coach of the Year. I think what the Heat have done in a year, no one really necessarily expected this.
No.
They've been phenomenal.
And I like their additions. Obviously, they're probably the second best trade in my opinion.
Right.
Getting rid of those terrible contracts and James Johnson, Dion Waiters, and bringing in Iguodala, who was probably the most pivotal player on the trade deadline. Mm-hmm. Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill. I liked where they're going.
Right. And then moving on to the Pacers, I mean, the Pacers are the Pacers. I feel like it's kind of been a similar kind of mold these last couple of years. I think the big question is, what does a healthy Oladipo bring to the Pacers?
Well, they really made a trade deadline move by not making a trade deadline move when Victor Oladipo returned.
Right. And I think it was interesting. From the beginning, it seemed like the Pacers were using Oladipo as their trade deadline transaction. They knew they were getting him around this time. And you didn't hear any rumors. I think the Miles Turner getting traded, not happy, that's been speculation for years.
Oh, yeah.
I think
what's up with Pacer fans not liking Miles Turner?
I think they had a case when he was the center. He was the guy. I could understand what they're saying. He's soft. He's not going to get in there and do the dirty work. But now you don't need that from him.
Yeah, that's not what he's there for.
He plays the perfect role now for what he has been doing because you have someone like Domas Sabonis who is doing the dirty work, obviously being an all-star. It's interesting to me that the only thing you heard was potentially dropping TJ Leaf just clear up a roster spot, and they didn't even do that. They realized, let's take what we got for right now. We could use that later on. And
they made their one addition, which was Victor Oladipo.
Right, they got that.
But don't really like what I've seen since his return. Obviously.
I don't either, but I think it for sure gets better. I think they return to being up there because whether anyone wants to say it or not, the Pacers, they've had good chemistry this year.
Yes.
So when Oladipo comes in and you bump
another Coach of the Year candidate, by the way.
Oh, for sure. Nate McMillan's done an amazing job.
McMillan.
So you have someone like Aaron Holiday who's finally getting his opportunity. He's played well. And you bring in TJ McConnell. McConnell's played well. And so then Oladipo comes back. You're clearing out some of those guard minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Holiday's barely seen the floor. McConnell's minutes have reduced a little bit. So whether you want to admit it or not necessarily that there is drama in the locker room, but I think some of those guys are definitely upset, just like anyone would be. You're having an extremely good year, and because of someone coming back, it's almost like, it wasn't enough in their heads. So I think some of that kind of comes back to normal. Some of those tensions will kind of disappear. I like the Pacers build. I like the lineups they can put on the floor with a healthy Oladipo, and I like them to make a push. I don't know if they have what it takes to win the Eastern Conference, but I think they definitely have enough in them that they could make a push for the Eastern Conference Finals.
I agree, and I think we can both agree. We just said it, a dicey transition period, but it's absolutely worth it, and you have to go through it.
Right.
Victor Oladipo is that good of a player.
For sure. Staying in the East, staying with questions, what's going on in Philadelphia?
Oh my gosh, as a Boston Celtics fan, Jonah, I love it.
I bet you do.
I don't know. We didn't even touch on this move. The Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III trade.
I think that was a much-needed move for Philadelphia.
I agree.
They needed those kind of the wing guard.
They needed depth.
That can shoot, and they needed the depth.
Alec Burks is having a really good year.
Oh.
He's shooting 40% from three.
Yep.
15 points a game.
The big thing, and I said this from the beginning when they brought in Horford. They did not have enough shooters on the floor. And just like we've talked about with the Rockets don't have a center. And then here you have the 76ers.
The complete opposite.
They have two centers on the floor at all times.
And a power forward in Ben Simmons.
Right. You do not, Embiid's going to have streaky shooting. Horford's going to have streaky shooting. So you have two average three-point shooters who at times can be below average.
Yes.
And then someone like Simmons
who refuses.
Most of the time he will not even take a three. So 3 of your 5 starters in a day that is so three-point oriented struggle shooting the ball a lot. And I don't think it works in today's NBA, and I think that's shown. And I think
that's why they've fallen back to the 6th seed in the East.
Right. I think the 76ers at times have shown those moments when Embiid's clicking, when Simmons is attacking, that they can be a good team. It's just ultimately they don't have the scores right now, I don't think, to get it done the way they need to get it done, which I think it'll be interesting to see how Glenn Robinson steps in, how Alec Burks steps in to provide some of that scoring that they desperately need.
Where do you think this team can still reach the NBA Finals?
Not this year, no. I think I would have liked to see them try to stay put as much as possible because when you look at it, they were a bounce away from the finals.
It's true.
They had the opportunity last year.
They were about to beat the defending champion, or the championship Raptors.
Yeah. So I think it's unfortunate that the way they went out last year, I've never been a fan of the 76ers. The process, I don't like them. But I would have liked to see them run it back with Kawhi leaving the East. I would have loved to see that same team take the court and try to work things out.
If they don't reach the finals this year, they'll have a.
They're going to have some interesting moves to decide. I saw today the rival teams are already preparing for a possible Joel Embiid trade. I don't know if you saw that.
I don't know if I told you or not, but a couple of months ago I made a prediction. Joel Embiid to Boston. I don't know when, but I think that is down the line.
Yeah, I could, not out of question. I think it's possible for sure. And then we had the Hawks Cavaliers down, but we've touched on them.
Mm-hmm.
We've touched on everything really. The big things we want to talk about were the trades, and I feel like we covered that pretty well. So
is it Boston Celtics time,
Boston
Jonah?
Celtics time.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, obviously, I just hit it off with a Joel Embiid trade prediction, so that's pretty crazy. But Boston, they stood pat at the deadline. They did not make a move. They chose to forego. They obviously were looking at Drummond. They were looking at Clint Capella. They were looking at Davis Bertans. And they chose to do nothing. And I'm really looking forward to the buyout market for Boston.
Do you bring a guy like Isaiah Thomas back?
Oh, Jonah.
Because at times your backup guard play has been streaky. Wanamaker's not cutting it. As a Purdue fan, I want to see I want to see them cut Carson loose and let him. Because I feel like at the beginning of the year, obviously a rookie, second rounder like that, not going to have necessarily the opportunities. But I feel like at a time where Tremont Waters hasn't really necessarily cut it, and the minutes he's had, Edwards hasn't cut it, Wanamaker hasn't cut it. I want to see all three of those guys get an equal chance to just say one game, Edwards gets the backup minutes, see how he does. Next game, Waters gets the backup minutes. I want to see them really almost as a tryout, in my opinion, because
I've seen similar once for Taco Fall to get some looks at where we need that.
Right. So I think looking at someone like Isaiah Thomas wouldn't necessarily be a bad move if you're the Celtics.
Isaiah Thomas. Evan Turner has been another former Celtic who's been brought up in the buyout market. Yep. Boston's needs heading into the trade deadline, obviously they didn't use any of them, go after any of them, but it was that backup guard, a forward who can shoot off the bench, and everybody has been clamoring for Boston to get a center, and I think they have the pieces they need. Obviously, we need to see Robert Williams III get healthy. I'd love that. So looking forward to that. I don't think we go after Isaiah Thomas. Knowing Danny, we traded for him originally to come off the bench, but I don't think Isaiah Thomas is the player that we all remember and we wish that he was. I'd love to see him back, but I don't see it happening. The player I am most interested in is Tristan Thompson.
For sure.
I don't think he's going to get bought out by Cleveland, though. I don't know why, because like you said, they have Andre Drummond and Kevin Love now. But no, I don't think they'll buy out Tristan Thompson.
I think Thompson could be a really good fit if they can find a way to bring him.
He could be a good fit anywhere, though.
Right. I agree. 100%.
Moving on to Phoenix.
Yeah, this is going to be a little saying what I would call what's going on in the desert, because that's a lot.
What's going on in the desert?
It is a lot.
Is
Suns
it
are
now?
21-23 right now. Started extremely well. They fizzled it out. Big thing, Booker was snubbed. I'm not even going to get in on that because I'll get frustrated.
We'll go over the All-Star game probably later this week, actually, with the All-Star game coming up.
Yep. We'll save that for a different time because I think the big storylines is how Kelly Oubre's play this year has been insane. And I think
you saw them looking at trades for him.
Right. I think it also took Kelly a little off guard too when there's rumor that the Suns are taking calls, they're listening to calls, but at the same time I think Kelly understands that's the business of the game. You have to listen to calls.
You hope
for your
so.
good players, right? That's all about making your team better. But Kelly has been extremely good. Ayton obviously suspended 25 games, but he's had some games. He's had a 30-19 game this year. He has had times where he has been able to get whatever he wants. And then last night the Suns announced they waived Tyler Johnson, which I think it benefits both people. I think the Suns, they needed a roster spot to potentially bring in maybe even Isaiah Thomas, like I just mentioned for the Celtics. Maybe try to bring back Dragon Bender, give him another chance. I think they needed that flexibility to have an opportunity to bring in someone because their bench desperately needs scoring. And then at the same time, Tyler Johnson was extremely good late in the year last year when the Suns
He did just get bought out.
Yeah. So the fact that they waived him and he's going to have an opportunity to possibly go to a contender and help them out. I'm happy for Tyler because I saw a lot of tweets about this, and I noticed the same thing listening to them. He is one of the most genuine NBA players out there. He's honest with the media. He's genuine. He's like, I feel like he deserves to have the opportunity to go on the floor somewhere because I feel like this year with the depth we've needed to guard when we had I expected Tyler Johnson to have that. I expected him to step up and be that backup guard, and he hasn't done it. And it's sad for him because he has the potential, and he's a great guy, like truthfully. And then speaking of guards, I like Ricky Rubio, but he's not getting it done on the offensive end. Honestly, he's almost like a liability to have on the floor late in games because he'll do this move where he'll take one dribble back after getting a lane, and his shot is just so flat it gets blocked. So, and he's not a good three-point shooter. He just does not bring a lot of offense for a team that needs some of that guard scoring, And then I don't know. Sometimes the direction of the franchise, it's still foggy.
What would you have liked to have seen them offer up for D'Angelo Russell?
I think I wouldn't have necessarily been upset with Kelly Oubre because I would have understood what we were getting. But I'm glad we kind of held off on Oubre. But Mikal Bridges has been extremely good for the Suns. So you could have thrown Mikal a first and a second. I think Mikal could have been – you may have had to throw in someone like L.A. Kobo or Javon Carter in place of how good of a first-round pick the Warriors received.
Do you think that's getting it done?
But I think the Suns had their options, and maybe even someone like Tyler Johnson, sending him to Golden State. I think I'm not mad that we didn't bring him in. I wish we could have at least really – I just feel like we didn't really try to bring him in. And that upsets me because that could have been potential for something special. I think my big thing is the Suns bringing in D'Lo. I think to bring that trio of Cat, Booker, and D'Lo together makes more sense just because of the fact Booker's locked in. If we don't want to trade him, Booker's locked in for another 5 after this year. Like, he signed that massive extension. So Booker's here if we want him to be here. Obviously, Cat wasn't happy. So you bring in someone like D'Lo, and Cat stays unhappy.
And it positions the Timberwolves
to have to make a move, and the Suns are right there, and they have Ayton. I'm glad we have Ayton. I don't want to get rid of Ayton right now. But you have the ability to swap Ayton for Cat.
Oh, you act like Minnesota would just do that, though, and I do not.
No, you definitely have to give up some stuff, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But getting those 3, I think, was more reasonable if D'Lo comes to the Suns in that standpoint. So I think the Suns definitely could have thrown an offer out there, but I'm not heartbroken they didn't do it. It just bothers me. It just didn't seem like they were really interested in it at all. Mm-hmm. And that's my spill. So, honestly, I've gotten out what I want to talk about. I don't know if you have anything else.
I think that was a wonderful end with your awesome Phoenix Suns, Jonah. Having a great year.
Great year.
13th in the West. And I think the Boston Celtics fighting for that 2 seed out east. But Toronto's been great, obviously. We'll touch on more NBA news later, more NBA teams. Obviously, this is an NFL, NBA, MLB. We'll even get to some NHL stuff, but you have listened to the first episode of the ST Squared podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you've made it this far, it was an
Join
NBA.
Join us again, please.
Yes, please. An NBA trade deadline special for episode 1, and we'll have more coming your way later this week. Thank you so much for listening to Jonah Freeman. I'm Andrew Willett.
Thank you. Seriously, thank you again. I hope you guys stick with us because both me and Andrew both have a passion for sports. So for us to be able to get our thoughts out like this, it'd be awesome to have a following of us doing it. So I really appreciate anyone that did make it this far, if anyone.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you.
ST Squared.
We're out.